In lecture at 3, we're going to talk about regulation. Okay, so what that means is how is digestion regulated via the nervous system and the digestive system itself. Now, what I want to do is take you back into time where we reviewed the wiring, right, of our nervous system. And here, if you look at the branches of the autonomic nervous system, we went over sympathetic and parasympathetic, but now we're going to get into enteric, which means mind of its own. And if you remember the histology, right, that I reviewed for you folks, is that this enteric mind of its own is controlled via ganglia that resides in the GI tract. And here they are. You see all this yellow? Boom, 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 boom. This is all ganglia. Ganglia all in this area, right? Telling the GI tract what to do. We also have, and let me change my color. And I'm just going to make it black, because black on red shows up well, right? In between the muscle layer here, I also have in the enteric nervous system, right? So this is ganglia. So what I'm drawing for you folks is a review, and I'm redrawing all the ganglia that's residing inside of the wall of the entire GI tract. So the GI tract now, right, can control itself. Hence the wording, mind of its own. All right, so let's discuss the wiring between the CNS, central nervous system, and the enteric nervous system within the digestive tract. So there's something called a long reflex and a short reflex. So let's do some definitions, and then we'll talk about the mapping, right? So a long reflex is going to originate outside the GI tract, the brain, and that's what you folks are seeing here. When it says cephalic means head. So this is the brain region. And so here you start with a feed forward reflex. So if you folks remember feed forward, right, is that if I smell something, if I see something, if I hear crinkle, 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 right, is that those signals from the brain can be sent down to my GI tract, and that's where I start having a growling stomach. Oh, I'm hungry all of a sudden. Or I start salivating, right? That's your feed forward mechanism. Now, this long reflex is also a reason why you can now have, via your emotions, butterflies in your stomach. Some kids and adults vomit when they're emotionally distressed, right? So sometimes when I have to lock my daughter out of the office, she doesn't understand what's going on, but I got to record, and she's out there crying so hard that she's vomiting, right? That's an emotional reflex, is that what's going on in the mind is sending now signals that are now connected to your GI tract, induced vomiting. Okay, now everything in order to turn on the long reflex will begin with a stimuli. Okay, and I already mapped those out. I see food. I hear food. Yes, food makes sound. I smell food. I think about food. Oh, lovely food. Okay, that will bring everything into play. I start off with stimuli, and then once I now have that stimuli, my parasympathetic neurons are going to start to fire, specifically the vagus nerve. Okay? And then ultimately, you know that sympathetic neurons inhibit GI function, right? So this is a review from our autonomic lecture. Now, when we're talking about the short reflex, okay? So short reflex, we don't use the brain. We don't use the central nervous system. Is that the enteric neurons, all that ganglia that I drew for you folks, embedded in the wall of the GI tract, are surveying the environment of the GI tract itself and making decisions alone. Okay? And then, of course, always, we can also work with the central nervous system. So what I want to do now is together, I want to draw out the long reflex and the short reflex. And so I want to draw out the brain. And so I'm just going to have a little structure here, my little cloud that's going to represent the brain. And I'll label this brain. Okay. And then, of course, I'm going to have my GI tract. And I always make my GI tract look like this little beautiful squiggly line here. Yeah, that's the GI tract. Okay, so let's label it just in case you forget what that is. GI tract. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a circle here to represent all of the ganglia. Yes, all of the ganglia. Whoa. Yeah, that's a circle. All the ganglia that's residing inside the GI tract. And I'm going to call this thing the enteric nervous system. NS stands for nervous system. Okay. Now, I told you folks, right? So for the long reflex, you need to have stimuli, and that stimuli can come via two places. So what I'm going to do now is I want to change my pen color, and I'm going to use blue. Is because I told you folks in the previous slide, my senses, yes, my senses come into play. Can I see food? Can I hear food? Crinkle, crinkle. Steak sizzling. Steak sizzling on a cast iron pan. The smell of steak searing. Blah, blah, blah. You get the point, okay? So here, I know that I'm going to have some receptor, and then I can now send these messages to my brain, and they will be received in some area of the brain. And let's not get too detailed in what area of the brain, okay? Because I don't want to concentrate on that right now. Now, I also have sensory from the GI tract, right? And so here, if your GI tract is empty and it's growling, you can sense that, right? So you can sense your migrating motor complex, right? And so all of that stuff is going to be sensed through sensory neurons, right? So this is going to be sensory, that's special senses, and this is going to be visceral, sensory, but all the same, sensory, right? Okay. And so now I have stimuli, okay? Now what the brain can do is it can activate one of two branches of the autonomic nervous system, right? So here, let's draw them. Let's draw red for parasympathetic. And of course, I'm going to have I said parasympathetic, didn't I? I meant to say sympathetic. Okay, so here's a sympathetic neuron, and we know that the sympathetic nervous system can shut down digestion. So let's just draw it here, and this is going to be sympathetic neurons. Okay, and then so red means stop, and then we have to have green is go, right? And so let's pick up green color here. And so this is going to be my parasympathetic neurons, because remember, parasympathetic neurons, they upregulate digestion, right? And so this is going to be parasympathetic, okay, nervous system. Specifically, and I told you folks, yes, this is the vagus nerve. All right. Okay, that's our wiring. Okay, so let's review. I have senses coming into my brain, and I hear steak frying. I feel my migrating motor complex motoring, right? And so what am I going to activate? Which neuron, which branch of the autonomic nervous system? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch a tiger by the toe. Parasympathetic, right? And so what's going to happen now is, and I'm going to stick with the same green, right? This is all vagus nerve. So if I can have some green wiring here, and this is going to be all vagus, is I can now increase the activity of a whole bunch of stuff. So let me change my pen color again. And let me write this stuff in black, right? And so here, I can have the upregulation or downregulation of activity of smooth muscle. Exocrine cells. So exocrine cells are secreting digestive enzymes, mucus, bile, okay? And then I also told you at the beginning of this lecture is that I also regulate digestion via hormones. And so I have to activate some endocrine cells, okay? Now, I'm writing activity of the following processes generically, okay? So we do know that if the vagus nerve is turning on, I'm going to upregulate the activity of smooth muscle. I'm going to have more peristalsis, more segmentation, more secretion, right? Because I'm upregulating digestion. Now, I'm not going to draw all the branches of the sympathetic nervous system because I want to concentrate on digesting, not stopping digestion. But do know that the sympathetic nervous system would downregulate all this activity, okay? But yes, let's concentrate on upregulating digestion, okay? Now, let's change our pen color again, and let's go back to green. And so via the vagus nerve, what can happen? And yeah, that's the vagus nerve still, because this is the long reflex that I'm drawing, okay? So this is the vagus nerve. Then what's going to happen is I'm going to change GI motility. Yes. And so remember, this can be peristalsis, segmentation. Okay. So motility. And then I'm going to release or secrete. I'll put release secretion. So it's not secrete secretions. It's a lot of S's. Release secretions. Okay. And that can be bile, enzymes, hormones, etc. Okay? All right. Now, I just did the long reflex. Okay? Now, what the enteric nervous system can do is it can upregulate itself. Okay? So, for example, if I eat a bunch of food, the enteric nervous system, it has receptors in the lumen of the GI tract. So it can monitor what is going on in the GI tract without the sensory neurons that are now innervating the brain. Okay? We don't need the brain. If you are in a coma and your entire central nervous system was out, you could run digestion all by itself. Okay, and I think that's an amazing thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pick a color for the enteric nervous system. And I know there's a lot of colors that I've been putting out here, and I don't remember the theme I was using, but I'm just going to do in purple. This is all short. Okay, so this is all the short reflex. Now, with the short reflex, I'm just going to draw these same arrows, right? Because what I just said is the enteric nervous system has receptors inside of the GI tract, okay? The enteric nervous system lives in the GI tract, people, okay? So it can also upregulate the activity of smooth muscle endocrine cells and exocrine cells, and it can now then upregulate motility and increase secretions, all right? Now, interestingly, the enteric nervous system can also talk to the stomach. Okay, so I'm going to just draw a stomach. So here, all purple, remember, this is all wiring of the enteric nervous system. So I'm going to draw the stomach, and I'm drawing all of my structures in black, right? So here I go. I can turn on anything going on in the stomach. And some of you folks are, why the stomach? It's because digestion also occurs in the stomach and small intestines. Okay, so this is stomach. Small intestines, okay? And so here, what can happen is that we can now upregulate the following. Back to my purple pen to show you the innervations, right? enteric nervous system upregulates certain cells in the stomach, and it tells the stomach, hey, you need to secrete something called GI peptides. I make it pretend I can hear all your folks' pens going click, 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 click. Are you clicking with me? I hope you are, okay? So this is GI peptides. And GI peptides is a generic term for chemical signal molecules. So I'm going to put chemical signaling, click, 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 molecules. I do miss you folks, by the way. But don't tell anybody, because they're going to think I'm soft. All right, now go back to the purple. Click, 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 click. Go back to the purple. All right, here we go. Okay, so here, if I upregulate cells in the stomach, they will start to secrete certain GI peptides, okay? And they're signals. And I'm not going to go through what peptides they are, because that's for our metabolism lecture, but just know, you will know these peptides. And this is a whole lecture in its own, okay? And those GI peptides can go in two areas, okay? So I'm going to draw you folks two arrows, because I can go up to the brain, but then I can also stay in the GI tract. And so here, for GI peptides, if they bind to the brain, yes, they can tell the brain whether I am hungry. How do you spell hungry? Hungry or satiated. What? That is amazing, right? Okay. GI peptides, depending on the environment in the GI tract, will be secreted. They will come up to the brain and tell the brain, hey, stop eating, or hey, you better eat because you're hungry. Okay. Now, GI peptides can also be communicating molecules that could bind to, let's say, for example, the endocrine pancreas. What do you folks know about the endocrine pancreas? Right? Is that here I can now secrete, and I'm going to put arrows up regulate or down regulate the secretion of insulin or glucagon. Okay. It says glucagon. And these are hormones of the endocrine pancreas that we're going to talk about in our next lecture. But this is where we're going. Okay. This is the wiring, people, of our digestive tract. And yes, we do receive some information and control from the central nervous system. However, like I said before, the enteric nervous system can do everything on its own. And if you look at this pathway here, the enteric nervous system can tell the brain what to do. So the enteric nervous system can control the brain, which brings me to my last topic of this slide. Okay, and I'm going to write this in red because this is an amazing that a lot of people have researched. Now, if you know what's going on in the GI tract, is we have something called, and this is all these red dots that I'm drawing, that is the bacterial fauna. Okay. What does that mean? That means in the GI tract, we have bacteria, and we need those bacteria. We need them in order for them to help us break down the molecules in order for us to get monomers to digest. Okay. So the bacterial fauna is also something called the microbiome. Okay. Now, there's an O in there. Okay. Microbiome. Now, the microbiome, aka the bacteria in our gut, it can influence brain activity. How, you say? I heard you. Because think about it, right? I just told you that the enteric nervous system has receptors that is assessing everything that's going on in the lumen of the entire GI tract. So if there's bacteria in there, And if they're secreting their own signaling molecules, those bacterial signaling molecules will bind to the enteric neurons and therefore hijack the enteric nervous system, because the enteric nervous system will send messages from bacteria to the brain. Okay? This is why bacteria, your bacterial fauna, is very important to manage, is because bacterial fauna can control the following. It can control your brain activity. Okay? And what you eat is linked to what you feel. So it's linked to anxiety. It's linked to your appetite. It's linked to your weight. It's also linked to your learning and your memory. This is very, very, very hot research topic right now. And it is well mapped out. You are what you eat, people. Is because whatever you eat will sustain certain bacteria numbers in your body. That's why I keep telling you folks, eat well, exercise, is because this bacteria fauna will help you on your path through life if you have the correct bacteria in your GI tract. Poor diets, you don't have a strong bacteria fauna that promotes good feelings in your brain, okay? So careful what you eat, people. And with that public service announcement, I will end this lecturette. And moving forward, we're going to start to get into more details about what's happening in regards to chemical breakdown and absorption in each specific area of the GI tract. Peace out.